Winston Churchill. You hear that name, and what do you think of? Right? A cigar, that V for victory sign, defiance. But what if I told you that for most of his life, the man we call one of the greatest leaders ever was actually seen as a massive failure? And that's the central puzzle of his life, isn't it? I mean, how does a politician who for decades was just seen as a total failure somehow become this global legend? That's exactly what we're going to dig into.
Okay, so to get to the bottom of this paradox, we've got to go right back to the start. Before he became this larger-than-life myth, there was just the man. And believe me, his early career was anything but a straight shot to the top. So get this. Churchill was born into the absolute peak of British aristocracy. But he was never the type to just play by the rules. He was super ambitious, kind of impatient, and he was constantly switching political parties. He even pushed for these really risky and often disastrous military campaigns. You've probably heard of the Gallipoli landing in World War I. Yeah, that was him. So to the people in power, this didn't look like leadership. It just looked like straight-up recklessness and arrogance. And all these missteps, they eventually got him completely kicked out of power. But here's the thing. This time he spent in the political wilderness, as they called it, it wasn't the end of his story. It was, kind of unintentionally, the perfect training ground for the biggest fight of his life.
I mean, just look at this timeline. You can see a really clear pattern of failure. After that rocky start, he just kind of lurches from one political disaster to another in the 1920s. He made this catastrophic call to put Britain back on the gold standard. A total mess. So by the time the 1930s rolled around, he was a complete political outcast. He was totally isolated in what he himself called his wilderness years.
But here's the crazy part. While he was sitting on the sidelines, completely out of the picture, Churchill saw something that almost everyone else in power either couldn't see or maybe just didn't want to. He saw this dark shadow of tyranny creeping across Europe, and he knew a massive storm was about to break. And don't think for a second he was just sitting around feeling sorry for himself. He was actually using this time to sharpen the very tools he'd need later on. He was writing these epic history books, which is where he really mastered the art of language. He was painting, which helped him channel all that crazy energy he had. And, most importantly, from this lonely position on the outside, he became one of the only powerful voices in Britain screaming about the threat of Adolf Hitler. And then it happened. The storm he'd been warning everyone about finally hit. The world was literally on the brink of collapse. And guess who gets the call? The one guy who'd been laughed at, ridiculed, and pushed aside? He was now being asked to lead his country through its absolute darkest hour. Just try to put yourself there for a second. It's World War II. Bombs are just falling on London night after night. The threat of a full-blown invasion is completely real. It's terrifying. You can imagine how that feeling of total hopelessness could have just crushed the entire nation's will to keep fighting. And right into the middle of all that fear, all that despair, Churchill steps up to the microphone and says this: "We shall never surrender." And you have to understand, that wasn't just some political speech. No, it was a weapon. It was a roar of pure defiance that blasted out over the radio, and it literally turned all that despair into this stubborn, unbreakable will to fight on. See, he knew he had to be more than just another politician. He had to become a symbol. His powerful speeches were the start, but then he built this whole image on top of that. That gruff voice, the cigar that was always there, the V for victory sign. He turned himself into a living, breathing symbol of resistance. All right, so he leads Britain through the hell of war, all the way to victory. You'd think a hero's welcome for life was pretty much guaranteed, right? Well, the last chapter of Churchill's political life has one more pretty shocking twist. That's right. The guy who literally saved the nation was almost immediately voted out of office. The people were just exhausted by war, and they wanted a new kind of leader for peacetime. The wartime hero was basically told, "Thanks for everything," and then shown the door. But this, right here, is where we find his real, lasting legacy. It was never really about staying in political office. It's in the sheer power of his words that still inspire people today. It's in his incredible resilience, this idea that you can fail and fail again, but still rise up when it matters most. His entire story became a blueprint for what it means to stand up and fight for democracy. So it all leaves us with this one big question, doesn't it? Can our greatest failures actually forge our greatest legacy? Churchill's life seems to scream yes. The man who was a joke for decades became the lion who roared for freedom. And that roar, well, it was forged in the fire of his own defeats.